You need to start showing up for yourself. Have you ever had a coffee date or a lunch date planned with a good friend and then somewhere last minute they cancelled on you? It felt terrible, right? Well, that's the same thing that you're doing to yourself. You're the friend who won't show up for your own self. And it seems and it sounds quite easy to think about, but it's just really simple, like many of the things in life. And along the way, along the mental health way, seems like we lost this. We lost this simple formula for life that you need to constantly show up for yourself. And our mental health has been more about comforting your bad behavior, bad mannerisms. You would rather stay in that rut and just continue talking about it than actually try and get to fixing it, trying to take the steps forward. And you can see this because over the last few years, I've noticed that there's, especially after COVID, I've noticed that there's almost a resistance, an objection to anything that doesn't comfort, particularly young people. Because here's the thing, a lot of we don't want to admit it, but a lot of the mental health trend has coddled very many young people into a corner whereby they believe that the world should be as it is in their head, and if it isn't, then that's the world's problem, not theirs. And so what happens is, and you can see this a lot, particularly with COVID, the trend in isolation has just gone so much higher. And there was even a TikTok trend that showed people, not wanting to necessarily go outside just for the sake of bed rotting. Not that there was anything productive being done, not that I'm saying you should be productive at all hours, but then we're forsaking real life for this digital life. I saw this quote somewhere on TikTok that pretty much said, TikTok or Instagram, it pretty much said, you pity the moth for mistaking the bulb for the moon, but then you go about your daily life mistaking the screens for real life. But here's the thing, the screens are not even the problem. They're not even a symptom, they're an escape from the problem. And the bigger problem, as we'll come to see, is this escape, this runaway from the much needed resistance of life. When I say resistance of life, I mean in the sense of life is painful, sort of like going up a hill, and you have to kind of like conquer the resistance. You have to fight against that hill. But now it has come to the point that we've said that the hill should not be there, it should be flat, should be a valley, should always have these good times. And it stems from another trend where people have just decided to diagnose themselves with whatever an influencer is having. So, if I'm low on concentration and attention, all of a sudden is that I have ADHD. If I don't want to show up, it's not because of me. It's not because of that's a bad behavior. That's a bad habit to have. It's because of my anxiety. If I don't want to do anything, that is outside of my comfort zone, or I'm depressed, so I can't do that. And because of that, many young people are being led down this slaughterhouse, really, because what will happen with that is the minute you identify with that ideology, your brain doesn't know the difference between what's real and what you've sort of made up. And so the minute you've sort of told yourself that you are sick and there's nothing you can do about it, then your body will just kind of like accept it. Your mind will accept it. Now, the worst thing is that this takes away from the people who actually have issues, who are actually looking for help, And because there's all of these fakers and posers, and people are just using mental health for the sake, because it's a trend, because I can use it to get out of work, because I can use it to get out of showing up for other people. Yeah, if I don't manage a relationship, then it's my, instead of me going through the ups and downs of a marriage or of a relationship, I can simply just blame it on my mental health. So what this has done is that it has taken away from the people with actual trouble, and that's what I was actually interested in when I was researching for this video, because I came across this psychologist. He's called Peter Gray, and he has some very interesting articles that I've linked, of course. And he simply asked a simple question. He asked a simple question: what caused a huge increase in suicide, especially among boys, from the 1950s all the way to the 1990s? And how can we use that? We're going to see that. How can we use that to deduce a better formula for life, or maybe to just remind us what worked? Actually, it's that, to remind us of what worked. So he asked this question, and he wrote 3 articles that we're going to go over. And it's interesting when you just look at the graph from the very beginning. There's an obvious huge disparity between males and females in terms of the suicide rate. Now, this one already is not really accounted for in the media. It's actually sort of discounted. You can imagine if this was the other way around, there would be protests, there would be marches, there would be organizations, there would be so many things to cater to solving this problem. But then the sad reality of life is, when it's flipped around, then, you know, it's not that there's a male suicide problem, it's that men are not keeping up with society. Men are being isolated, men are depressed, men are not necessarily showing up. They need to pull themselves up. So interestingly, why is it then? And we need to go into solving this problem. And in order to do that, we need to actually figure out why this actually happened. And so the main way to do so is to go back, to sift through the data and to see the 3 phases. You can see from the 1950s to the 1990s, there was a huge spike, and there was an immediate drop from the 1990s up until 2008, the 2010 at least. And then after that, the trend went back up. So as scientists, we're asking ourselves, as realists, we're asking ourselves, what is the cause of this fluctuations, and what is it that we can actually pick up to make sure that drop comes back? What is it that actually works in terms of mental health matters? And I started this by saying that you need to consistently show up for yourself. We're going to see how that ties in the data. So the first article, he pretty much dived deep into the 1950 to the 1990s, which was pretty much this 4-decade run of consistent increase. Yeah, and the question is, what is this that happened? And over the 40-year period, we can see that children and teens in the mid-20th century, he writes, and earlier, had far more freedom to play, roam, explore, socialize, take risks, contribute meaningfully to their community, and do all the things that make young people happy and develop the character traits that promote resilience than they do today. There has been a cultural shift, is what he's saying. And you can sort of talk about it in the sense of, you know, that meme that it used to be that kids would be pulled out from outside to come inside. But then right now you have to sort of like really just kick the kids out of the house. Well, that was a major change, and it affected boys a lot more than it affected girls, because we're different developmentally. Freedom to engage in independent activities, he continues to write, activities not directly controlled and supervised by adults, was a major cause of the continuous decline in mental health among young people. As you will see in either of these sources, there is evidence that the trend toward ever more restrictions on young people's independence has continued since 1990. So he's simply saying that the freedom we associate with becoming who you are, the independence that is primarily taught from when you're a child, that carries on to your teenage years, in your young adult years, is missing in society, because it's not just about living in a surveillance state, it's about the fact that there wasn't the exploration, the socialization, the taking of risks outside of the home that are necessary to build the resilience necessary to weather through life's storms. So he talks about a simple third place, which is a church. And he says, why is it then that the people who attend church are on average happier than those who don't? I should just explain. Third places means you have your home, then you have either school or work, which is the second place. Those are two places. And the third place is often now another institution, whether it's churches, libraries, parks, places where you can interact within your community. And so he asked this simple question: why is it that people who attend church are much happier? Now, the religious people will obviously just shout, oh, it's because of, the power of the Lord and so on. But then, like I said, we're looking at the science here. And when we look much further, we can actually see that there is no correlation between religion and happiness, sadly. But what we are seeing is that being around people, being around that community in the church, the socialization, is the important aspect. So it's not even just about going to church. When I say showing up for yourself, it means getting out there and figuring out how to actually socialize and challenge yourself among a group of people who not necessarily agree with you. Not everyone has to agree with you, but you just have to get out there. We go much further and we ask ourselves, okay, so we've lost the socialization, the exploration, the independence, the go out and figure it out on your own throughout your childhood, teenage years, and young adult years. So why is it that there was an immediate drop in the 90s? What change was there? And this is where I was really, I found this article really profound, because he brought up, he really challenged my thought process, because I kept on being told that, you know what, it's that damn phone, yeah? It's the damn TV and it's that damn phone, and that's the reason why you're not really, socially adept, and you're not really, you're just stuck in this cocoon, in this bubble. And we like to blame, the social bubble, the echo chamber that we all are in because of Instagram and TikTok and this here YouTube. But then he comes with this data and he says, well, look at what happened in the 90s, is that there was a flood of devices, yeah? And these devices, pretty much primarily video games, computer video games, they brought this renewed sense of childhood, this renewed sense of freedom, of exploration, yeah? And people, could talk to each other, and people could kind of like have an activity together. And so even if people weren't necessarily going outside, it's sort of like another version of outside came indoors via modern technology. And we look at that, and I could sort of resonate with this, because up until like the PlayStation 2, PlayStation 3, those were really very social games. You kind of like, it brought people together, yeah? And there's online video gaming, of course. This is also the 90s and the 2000s, the rise of the internet and so on. And pretty much that was what brought the improvement in mental health that we're seeing. It wasn't about the video game itself. Again, the same way it wasn't about the churches. It was about the socialization, the exploration, the independence, you're good at something, you're good at a video game. And that concept of being good at something is really important, because one of the things that he says that is important developmentally is this, what we call an internal locus of control. And because of this internal locus of control, those who have it are able to face life's difficulties much easily, because they believe that whatever life throws at them, they can actually cope with it. But then here's the thing, over the last few decades, we have lost that internal locus of control. Now Gen Z is mainly known for having an external locus of control. The fact that, doom scrolling, financial nihilism, all of these trends, they're just saying to young people that, you know what, you are tiny and the world's problems are bigger than you, instead of the opposite. So the funny thing is, the video games and the church and all of that, they got this sort of like right because you have a little bit of agency. But then we look at what they build in terms of the component parts that we can use. When I started this video, it's pretty much about the component parts that we can use from this research in order to move forward in our lives. And what Dr. Peter Gray here is saying to us is that there's 3 basic psychological needs for you to have. This is across all ages. For you to have a healthy mental well-being is, firstly, autonomy. This is the whole going out, figuring out life for yourself. You have to have the freedom to make your own choices. As we shall see in the next article, without this freedom, once it's taken away, mental health really depreciates. The second is competence, the ability to actually be good at something that you've chosen from your autonomy. So whether it's video games and being experts at that, or whether it's just kind of like going out and figuring out hobbies and so on in your third place, the minute you can build competence, then you can build confidence. And so with this, that is lacking so fervently because we have become consumers and not producers. You can't build competence as a consumer. And then the third bit is to pretty much say that without the social circle, then it's not really worth it. It's sort of like that 3-legged stool. And so without other people, we are social beings, then what's the point? So try as much as possible to take care of relationships, because relatedness, that being with your peers, with your parents, with your comrades, with all of that, that's the third thing. And one can't do without the other. There is no, I just sort of like listed them out, but then they're all important. So he goes on ahead and he says, there was this massive drop that we can see in the data. Why is it that it started now coming back up? What happened in 2008, in the 2010s, that all of a sudden made this problem worse? And sadly, but we need to account for it because, again, we're trying to come up with logical conclusions. We cannot ignore the impact of the school system. And that's what he has in his data. He says, listen to this. During schooling, he says this, is that during this period, schooling became far more stressful and damaging to mental health than it had been before. And this resulted in an increase in the rates of anxiety, depression, and suicide among students. So what he saw is that from 2002, that's when the change actually happened, And in the US, they call it the No Child Left Behind Act. But I'm seeing sort of like a similarity between that and what happened here in 2002, where the education system really changed. It wasn't really about just free education. It was about intensifying the education and making it more rigorous and so on. And you might think this is a good thing, but what he's saying is on the opposite end, it was a bad thing. And this is what happened. So they brought in a more rigid curriculum. We all know that. And with this, they brought the high stakes. If you fail your KCSE or KCPE, you're done for life. So school stopped becoming a place for learning. It stopped becoming this second place where you can actually, form friendships and, learn and explore and socialize. And it now became about the tests. You need to pass the test. If you don't pass the test, then it isn't just about you being a failure. It's about your parents will now be a failure, and your teachers will be a failure, and the whole system, the administration, all of that. So everyone was under this tight scrutiny about the fact that education is so important that they actually forgot to educate. Put so much pressure, and it turned the school from an education system to an indoctrination system. So these schools were pressured to increase test scores. I remember this very well. They spent too much time in terms of, preps and more preps, and you're going to have this extra reading hours, and then you have tuition over the holiday. There is really no time to actually breathe. So the reason why we're seeing that spike up, that return, that increment in the curve, is because we all of a sudden decided that physical education is not a subject worthwhile. It has to be double math. And we all of a sudden decided that no, there's no such thing as swimming in school. That period is for learning your social studies. I had a class called Life Lessons, yeah? And perhaps the reason why I'm doing this YouTube is to kind of like fill all the lessons that I should have learned in those classes, because those classes became double math. Now, I haven't really used calculus in my day-to-day, but what I'm talking about right now has influenced my day-to-day a lot more than all the double math that we were talking about. So the thing is, it shows up in the data. This is not just me making stuff up, yeah? In surveys, kids say school is the primary source of their distress. Again, school changed from somewhere you go to learn to somewhere you need to pass this test. And what he's seen is that the rates of students, this is how we can collaborate this data, the rate of student suicide and suicide attempts plummet when school is not in session. This is why we love holidays so much, because we can finally breathe. But then, like I said, sadly, from this, last 10, 15, maybe 20 years, we have all of a sudden decided that there is no such thing as a holiday. Because on a holiday, you need tuition, you need to go for more classes, you need to keep up with this. Everything, even hobbies, have become monetized to the extent that if you don't figure out a way to convince yourself that this is worthwhile in terms of money, that it's not worth it. So because of that, he came to this conclusion. He says, this is a difficult conclusion for most adults in a society to reckon with. Most adults would rather attribute young people's distress to almost anything else. The research studies I have described here are almost never reported in the popular press. A tiny correlation between social media use and anxiety in girls gets major press coverage with sometimes dramatic headlines. Don't touch that phone, right? You've had it. It's that damn phone. But a study showing that 83% of teens cite school pressures as a major source of distress, far more than any other cause, or teens' rate of mental breakdowns and suicide are about twice as high when school is in session as when it is not. That gets no coverage. It's simply when we ask you, what's wrong with you? And then you say, school, or I don't make enough money. That won't get the blame. But then when we see you on your phone on social media, then we say, why are you spending so much time? And I know I said in the very beginning that that's sort of like a bad behavior, bad habit. But then remember that I also said that that is the result, that is the escape. It is the result of all of this. It is an escape. It is just another addiction, the same way people smoke or drink to escape their actual lives. But right now, we're not smoking, we're not drinking. What we're doing is we're picking up our phones and we're losing ourselves instead of actually facing up to the actual difficulties, the actual hardship of life. And in facing that hardship, it seems that we've forgotten, in facing that hardship is when we actually build the strength to go through life. So I guess this video is to pretty much remind you that therapy speak, talking about your problems, all of that won't actually lead you anywhere. We actually like to say that, you know what, when I talk about it, then it helps me define the problem. And that's true to some extent. But like a friend once told me, if you talk about it more than thrice, then you're not really looking to solve the problem, you're looking for attention. And that's the thing we have to kind of like come towards, the conclusion we have to come towards. Because at the end of the day, when you realize and you ask yourself this, am I actually looking to solve the problem? Or am I just looking for a willing listener to listen to my problems and give me attention and validate me so that I can feel good about myself for these few minutes, instead of actually taking the years, the months and years that it takes to actually dig myself out of this hole? Then the minute you actually ask yourself that is when you can actually get better. But until then, you're still going to go down this downward path, which is very, very dangerous. So, like I said in the beginning, when are you going to actually start showing up for yourself? Because you don't need therapy, you need momentum.